Yeah.
Good afternoon. So let us start our third week of this process. And we're very happy to be together with you today. This week will be a bit more, let's say, engaging than the first 2 weeks. So we will have this webinar today, just a very short one, 1 hour maximum. And then tomorrow you will have your coaching session with Alessia. Then you will have to work and produce. And then on Friday, we are going to go to be back all together to see a little bit the work that you have done and moving forward. Just to remember what we did in the first 2 weeks. So the first week we used that for, to have a joint understanding and reflection on the level of digitalization of your skill system and your TVET, let's say, programs. So it has been a very interesting first week to get a sense and shared vision among all of you about what is happening in the country and how this is going on with the digitalization that had already started and now was made quicker by the pandemic. Last week, actually, we worked a lot on the selection. So we worked on which were the, let's say, the scope of the work that we want to do. So we jointly defined based on some, let's say, guiding questions, how we can, what is going to be the objects that we are going to work on. And in particular, we identified a couple of competencies for the tourism hospitality sector. So more related to working with customers for the blending of the TVET programs and more related to food and beverage for the RPL assessment packages. And then for the construction sector, we decided to work on bricklaying level 1. So this is what was discussed last week. And we gave, let's say, some reasons why. So we defined for what reason we chose those occupations and those competencies. Maybe some of the highlights was that the strategic importance of that particular occupation and competency, the existence of projects that are in line with those competencies, the demands of the labor market for that particular occupation, and the existence of already some online training materials on other occupations that we may want to complement with this process. So actually, we took this whole photography of the situation that was already there, and then we decided to move on with some particular competencies. Today we are going to do something a bit different. We are going to work on now that we have decided the competencies and occupation, how can we translate that into learning outcomes and learning situations? This is a let's say a very critical point, because we already have our competency, we already have maybe in some of the competency standards some learning outcomes, but now we have to develop concretely how our students are going to, let's say, develop those skills, those competencies in which learning situations. So we need to be clear about the learning situation that we want to implement for those competencies to be developed by the students, so that next week we can then decide which of those learning situations we are able to digitalize and how. So this, as you see, it is a process with different steps. First, we understand the context we are moving in. Second, we decide which occupation and competency. Third, we, let's say, decompose those competency in different learning situations. And then we are going to pick which are the ones that we want to digitalize. And at the end, we are going to concretely digitalize, create, or develop new or adapt existing learning materials and assessment packages. So this is a little bit as an introduction. Are there any questions or points that you would like to ask at this point or to comment? Otherwise, we have prepared a brief presentation in order to discuss with you on those topics that we have introduced.
Hello, Mr. Stefano.
Please,
yes.
Keith.
I'm Vishna from Department of Standard, and I want to make clear that in the masonry, we have unit of competency, bricklaying, plaster work, and tiling. So we choose only one bricklaying for example to do the digitalization, right?
Okay, so you want to work on bricklaying?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. So not bricklaying and tiling, only bricklaying.
And as we discussed before, in my team, I have document about the bricklaying only a level 2, and I hope that my members, if they choose the level 1 to do, so please give the document as a team member who has the document on level 1. For me, I have only a level 2, the learning material like this. So I hope
okay.
that
Alex, I think we have bricklaying level 1, right?
Yes, as we discussed before, we choose level 1 to do. So
yeah.
I'm checking. I don't have a document learning material or level 1. I have only standard competency standard.
Okay.
So,
Alessia, do we have the whole documents for level 1?
There's some pages missing. So based on the index, bricklaying level 1 should be at page 41, but the document stops at page 38. Although we have information on bricklaying on level 2.
Okay.
Now, maybe I read twice, sorry.
Hi, Kim.
Yeah, I need to hire my colleagues. Actually, we are on hand on the place. We have standard new package level 1 in masonry, only competency standard, but in Khmer language, we have no the learning material. Now we want to use for the modeling, for the sample, for the digitalized e-learning material. We want to use the standard package level 2 for the masonry. In masonry, we combine together with the unit of competency of the bricklaying, plastering, and tiling. So my colleague, we want to take, we take from only unit competency bricklaying or a whole of competency among the masonry level 2.
Okay, so we do have the competency standard for bricklaying level 1.
No.
No.
We have masonry.
Okay, we have masonry. Okay.
Yeah, masonry. But now I request so because last week I cannot join because of my condition. Now I want to request construction team to use the masonry level 2. Secure level 2 is better because we have on hand learning content. Need for face-to-face offline learning.
Okay.
We want to transform to
digital version, blended.
Learning,
yeah.
The user existing material.
Okay,
like
so
masonry is combined all together, working on the masonry. Yeah.
Okay, so what you're asking is if the construction can work on level 2, because for level 2 we already have the competency standard and some training materials, right?
Yes, we have competency standard, we have the competency-based curriculum, we have the assessment of case, we have the learning material. Well,
Okay, great.
But we complete to the set of module qualification in masonry, not point out only bricklaying. We have the combined to that we class of the making competency among of masonry level 2 for bricklaying, plastering, tiling, yet together in the masonry. Because Cambodia not focus the specialized, not specific only bricklaying like standard bricklaying or plastering or tiling. Because in Vietnam, in Thailand, in the Laos, they have developed only specified on the bricklaying, plastering and tiling. But Cambodia has say column masonry combined together in kind of masonry work.
Okay, so it's like polyvalent mason. Okay.
Yeah.
So we are going to focus for the process, if nobody is against it, on bricklaying level 2. This is what you mean?
Bricklaying, we have no standard, but we have the unique competency among of the competency standard of masonry. Okay,
fantastic. Yeah. Dear Kim, if you can post those documents here in the chat box, it would be great.
Yes. Yeah, may I ask my colleague, my Visna, Mr. Kung, we have upload in the.
You have uploaded in the platform.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, if we need, because we have English. Because I want to clarify you, in Cambodia, the approval and promulgate only Khmer language.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, not English. But the level 2, we have tried to translate in Khmer, in English language. So easy to from you to coaching us how to develop and transform to the e-learning material.
Yeah, for us, the English version is fundamental. Otherwise, we cannot help you. But we are going to improve also in our Khmer. So let us learn at least one Khmer word in every webinar, so that at the end we still already know a couple of words. So thank you very much. For those of you who were there in the webinar on Friday, do you have something against this fact of working on bricklaying level 2? Is that a problem?
I maybe not misunderstood. We not the competency standard bricklaying level 2. Only unique competency.
Yeah, you need competency. Yeah, problem.
Yeah. You is the skill set, not competency standard. Is the skill set of the because competency standard we combine consists of a lot of unique competency joined together in the create the national competency standard. So in the inside the masonry level 2 we have module unique competency of the unit bricklaying. Okay, we can use only module one.
Perfect. So we are going to work on the unit competency of bricklaying within masonry level 2.
Yes. Okay.
Okay. Perfect.
Yeah.
Clear. Is that a problem for the group?
Maybe as I clarify reading. Visna, Sambo, did you clear about this?
Yes, I'm clear. No problem about this. And go on.
Okay.
Great.
Yeah.
Okay, I see others. Okay, everybody agrees. Fantastic. So we are going maybe to modify that in our program. Okay, great. For tourism, we confirm our choices. So the idea was to work on communication, working with the colleagues and the customers for the vocational training materials, and food and beverage for the RPL. So I see no objection. That was the idea already last week. Okay, so we are going to explain a bit more about the whole process, the whole pedagogical process today. I will share my presentation, a short presentation. Some of you have already seen a part of it because it is part of our digital TVET program. So we go back on some of these concepts, but then we are also going to expand a little bit on the scope of our, let's say, of our program, of our coaching program. So what is, of course, important when we are discussing about all those topics of, let's say, of digitalizing training packages and RPL is that the focus should be on learning outcomes. So what we are doing here throughout this process is a process that is based on learning outcomes that we want our students in the initial TVET to develop, or learning outcomes that we want our RPL users to be evaluated, to be assessed on. So these learning outcomes are really at the heart of the work that we are doing. So briefly, the learning outcomes is not something that exists without any context, but rather they are already included in what you normally call a national or regional occupational standard. So these occupational standards are very important document because they define what a professional is expected to be able to know, to understand, and to do in order to be considered competent in this occupation. So we could say that these are state-of-the-art statements of what a competent performance is in the workplace. What is very important, and let me stress this from the very beginning, is that we are interested in our TVET programs to bring the person to a level of competency within the implementation of their profession. So what is important is that people are doing things in the correct way, mobilizing the resources that they have. And as I said, we need different types of resources. We need knowledge, we need skills, so the actual how-to of this professional situation, but we also need attitudes. So we are going to see how these three can be combined. So when we discuss on what is a competency, we discuss that this competency is really the use of these three types of resources, so knowledge, skills, and attitudes, to carry out work. So we need to be able to know, to do, and to behave, so to be in a particular manner, to blend these three resources, and then to have a successful performance on the job. Let's take an example. If you have, you bring your car to a garage. Being a competent garage mechanician has three, let's say, all three dimensions that we need to know. So for instance, if he has to repair your tire, he needs to know what is the level of air that he needs to put in your tire in order to inflate it. So there is knowledge. There is skills, because he needs to be able to use the specific tool to inflate your tire. But there is also attitude, because if this person behaves badly with the customer, you as a customer, you will probably go somewhere else another time. So actually repairing a flat tire needs a combination of all these three resources: theoretical knowledge and understanding, implementing a specific professional gesture, and the attitude that we actually implement, that we actually carry out, with which we carry out this professional situation. All the three of them being harmoniously blended makes a competency. As you know, occupational standards are very important because they are the foundation of our training, but at the same time, they are performance oriented. So when we develop curricula, or when we transform curricula, that is the process that we are doing right now, we are really, let's say, focusing on the performance that the person needs to have. So this performance is particularly important because, as I said some minutes ago, this is valid both for the training, but also for recognition of prior learning. Because once again, in recognition of prior learning, we are assessing the competencies of the person within a professional situation or a simulation that we are creating, be it through a portfolio, be it through a practical test, in several methods that we can use for the recognition of prior learning. But in any case, what we are going to assess is the performance. And we have some criteria in the occupational standard that will have that. In the occupational standard, as you know, we have two big parts. The first part is the analysis of the occupation. So what is the occupation? But then we also have the competencies. And you are very well endowed already. We have discussed throughout last week, but also the beginning of this very webinar on the competencies. So the standards of the competencies and how we can assess the people to have in order to understand if they possess this competency. As usual, when we are developing a curricula, but also when we are transforming this curricula, we need to we need to take as a reference the, let's say, the competency standards that we have. But at the same time, we are deriving from those competencies the learning outcomes and the assessment criteria that are very much needed in order to create curricula on the basis of learning outcomes. These learning outcomes give us the possibility to then assess, let's say, develop those learning outcomes, but also to assess these learning outcomes during the assessment at the end of the training program or through RPL when we want to validate an existing competency that a person has already developed. In this way, we create a link between the curriculum and the occupational standards, because the learning outcomes are phrased, are referenced to the different let's say, learning outcomes that are existing in the competency standard. So we need to really follow this process. Now, when we are developing our curricula, so when we are drafting our outcomes, we are transforming what we already have as actions and outputs in our curriculum, in our competency standard, into learning outcomes. So tangible learning that we can observe within the training pathway of the person. In the curricula, what we will have are standards, are learning programs, learning materials, including the way in which we are going to assess those learning outcomes. And then in some countries, you also have some quality assurance principle on how you deliver and assess the competencies and the learning outcomes. Learning outcomes are key in this process, and you already have them in your competency standards because they define what a trainee should know, should understand, and should do in order to, let's say, demonstrate the achievement of the learning process. We may have several types of competencies, and all these competencies need to be broken down into learning outcomes. How are learning outcomes now important in the process of digitalization? When we are digitalizing training materials or RPL assessment packages, like in the process that we are doing, we have to keep in mind that the process is still the same. So we are constructing curricula, modules, let me come back, or unit competencies, let me come back to that, and then also lessons. These three are the very important, let's say, building blocks of this process. So we have our curricula. These curricula are broken down in units, but then within these units, and this is the work that we are going to do this week, we need to be able to create the process in which we are going to actually deliver these contents and deliver let's say training moments in order for people to develop those learning outcomes. So learning outcomes will always be at the heart of what we are doing, even in the digital space, and in particular when we blend programs, because we will have learning situations that are going to happen in the digital space only, or that are going to be blended, to be merged with learning situations that are happening in the face-to-face modalities. But what we will always need to keep in mind is that we need to put at the heart of our reflections and of our work the professional performance. So how then people are implementing those competencies in professional or simulation experiences. So the how will change. So we will not do things in the classroom. Maybe we're going to do that in the digital learning environment. So the how may change, the technology change, the methodology may change, but the outcomes, the learning outcomes, will still be the same. So the work that we are going to do this week is not to reformulate learning outcomes, because the learning outcomes are already there, but we are going to define which are the learning situations that can contribute to the achievement of these learning outcomes. The learning outcomes that you already have in your competency standards are formulated in this manner. Maybe let's quickly go through this, let's say, specific characteristics of learning outcomes. They represent achievements. So this is an endpoint of, so they are formulated as something that is possessed by the person. They should be feasible. They should be accessible. So the link, as always, between learning outcomes and assessment is very important. Then you can achieve this learning outcome through a training or through professional experience. And that's where recognition of prior learning becomes pretty important, because it's what counts in the RPL system is not how you got there, but it's assessing those learning outcomes. And assessing them means that they should be measurable, they should be specific, and they should be observable. So these are the characteristics that you normally find. And of course, these are referenced to the more general qualification architecture within your country. As you probably know, but I will go quickly on that, the learning objectives, learning outcomes are formulated with these 6, let's say, tips. So they represent an action that a person do. They are formulated from the learner's perspective, so something that the learner possesses. They are result oriented, so they are concrete. They are specific so that we can actually look at what the learning outcome very concretely gives the possibility to do by the learner's perspective. They are integrated and they cover a specific domain of the occupation. Now, what we have to keep in mind in order to do the process that we want to do this week is that these learning outcomes are to be implemented in concrete professional situation. Let's take the example that the tourism sector has decided to work on. So when we are talking about communication, working well with learners, with colleagues and customers, we are referring to specific professional situations. And that's the situations that we have to train our trainees to work on. Vocational training is not giving people knowledge, but it's actually supporting people to have knowledge, but also to have skills and the right attitudes to implement competencies, so these three resources, within specific professional situation. So for instance, what are the situations in which we should communicate well with customers? So this can be when we welcome customers in our workplace. This can be throughout the process in which customers are in our restaurant or in our bars. This can be actually working with colleagues. So I don't know, team meetings. So we should really expose our trainees to these professional situations. And it is between this experiential learning that they will develop competencies. By bringing in these professional and to prepare for these professional situations, also through theory and practice. So these professional situations are the ones in which learner mobilize those resources and does so by integrating them. The example that I did on the flat tire and the garage mechanic is one of them. And these professional situations are at the heart of our competency-based training, because learners will develop competencies that then can be assessed. And this will be assessed once again through professional or simulation of professional situations. So if you want to test the competency to assess the learner, you will have them baking a cake, you will have them cooking a dish, you will have them preparing a beverage. So in any case, what we will assess is the implementation of competencies within concrete professional situations. You will know it because this is also the way in which Cambodian curriculum are constructed, that in competency-based approach, we tend to work with module or unit competency. So for each unit competency, normally, globally, we have normally between 3 and 6 learning outcomes that are specific to that particular unit. But in order to have these units, we need to create what we call learning packages, which are package of different learning situation that we can also call a sequence of learning situation, a learning sequence. So the trainer defines which is the sequence of learning situations that will help then trainees to develop one or more competencies. Just think about, I don't know, these 2 competencies that the tourism sector has decided to work on. Work well with customers and communicate well with customers and colleagues, and food and beverage. There is, of course, an intersection among those 2, because when we teach how to prepare food and beverages, there is also an element of communicate well with colleagues with whom we are working to do this technical, this professional performance. So never think about competencies in isolation, because competencies are always integrated. And this is very important when we define, when we design this learning sequence, because in this learning sequence, we are working maybe on more than one competency. Of course, the one specific competency will be at the heart. If it's food and beverage, then we will have food and beverage production, preparation. But at the same time, throughout these modules, we will have what we call the transversal competencies, soft competencies, soft skills, or communication oriented, etc. These things are also mainstream throughout the different learning packages. At the end of the learning package, we will have an assessment. So this will be at the end of the sequence, and we will use the performance criteria that are established in the competency standard. So let's say this learning sequence is made up of the different learning situations. So I will now I will give the floor to Alessia to continue for this presentation. At the point, Edmund, that you were making is made. I think what we mean by communicating well, I think this should be already included in the competency standard. So we will have to look at it in order to respond to this question. But the good thing that you have in Cambodia in particular is that you have done a lot of work. So you have a lot of assets to be used for this process. You already have unit competencies, you already have learning outcomes. Where probably there is a work to do is about learning situations, because you also have them, but you may want throughout this coaching process to work more in depth on these learning situations, because they are quite repetitive in the standard that you have, specifically for the tourism sector. For the construction sector, of course, we will have to define learning situations or learning sequences to develop the various learning outcomes. I will move on and leave the floor to Alessia.
Thank you, Stefano. Everybody hears me?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, yes, just like Stefano was mentioning before, what we are going to focus on for the next few slides and what we're going to focus on tomorrow specifically is the scenario where those learning outcomes will be developed. And again, to piggyback on the question that Edmund was asking, yes, you do have good theory about the communication skills that people should have working in the hospitality and tourism, but we will see how to apply these communication skills and how to meet the outcomes in very specific scenarios, and that will be very hands-on, but again, we'll tackle that tomorrow. So a scenario, pedagogically speaking, and in the context of scenario-based learning that we will see later on, is an instantiation of an instructional model for a given subject and for a very specific situation. So in a scenario, it is defined what learners and as teachers and trainers as well can do or should do with a given set of resources and tools. So moving on, Stefano, if you could, I don't know if I can do this, or Stefano can maybe move. Thank you. So this is the foundation of scenario-based learner, which is a pedagogical approach designed to create learning situation that will help develop trainings and assessment procedure that are typical or specific for your profession. So usually when we work on scenario-based learning, we utilize true-to-life tasks. So we really tackle authentic scenarios, authentic challenges that are learner-centered and that are engaging because learners have chosen specific topics to work on. So it is motivating in a way that other approaches are not. And moving on, thank you, Stefano. More specifically, it is a scenario that is best used when working on complex tasks, which require decision-making and critical thinking. So again, tackling a challenge, we are allowed to explore different possible answers to the challenge and then really internalize the outcomes that we are looking to tackle. So this is a scenario, again, that is not suitable for situations that are routine. For example, you are not going to use a scenario-based learning to teach Amazon how to fasten their safety equipment. This is something that can be done in different ways, such as quizzing, for example. We really want to use scenario-based learning when there is a challenge that can be tackled and that can elicit critical thinking and a creative way of answering this challenge. But of course, keep in mind that this is not a substitute for work experience. It is a way of enriching our work experience in a safe way. So using the communication example, what can be done if we want to see how a trainee talk to a rude customer? Well, it's probably best to test this situation in a simulation so that there is nobody getting emotionally hurt, and there's always way to get back into the correct way of interacting. So this is why we want to use this type of scenario-based learning when different solutions are made possible. Thank you. Okay, so one good characteristic of the scenario in scenario-based learning is that not only it allows us to work on hard skills, which are industry specific, but it allows us to work on soft skills, because we are encouraged to learn how to collaborate with our teammates. Again, this is something that being done in a scenario incorporates multiple players and actors, and we can negotiate perspective. And again, ethical behavior is shared as well. We learn how to be better workers and better teammates using this type of approach. And again, if Stefano, thank you. And again, we will see that in details tomorrow, but I wanted to give you a little overview on how to get our scenario-based learning rolling. So the first thing to do is to identify the learning outcomes. And we know that this is something that we have already. So what is crucial is once we identify the learning outcomes is that we move backwards. And from the learning outcomes, we create the situation that would elicit these outcomes. Again, we choose a topic that has to be challenging, that has not to be a routine task. And one suggestion is to choose critical incidents or challenging situation that you have encountered in your experience. So this will be the trigger. So we start from the trigger, and then we identify key areas that we want our trainees to really reflect on. And this reflection would later be assessed by peers, by mentors, by trainers, by managers. So again, it will be a collaborative way of working and troubleshooting a challenge. And something that is very useful is to use your network when working on scenario-based learning. So once you have a storyboard created, please ask your coworkers to go through it and make sure that this is a good way to tackle the challenges that you want to create to elicit your learning outcome. So again, work collaboratively. And thank you. Thank you for your patience and for your attention.
Okay, so this is what we wanted to share with you today. So the idea is that through scenario-based learning, we are going to identify how we are going to decompose the different learning outcomes of the competency that you have chosen in order to then actually implement the digitalization process, the digital transformation process of the training materials and RPL assessment package. This does not mean that there will be no let's say, parts in which the trainer is going to give a frontal, let's say, face-to-face session, or where there will be quizzes, etc. So, but this needs to be all, let's say, in the scenario that you are going to develop. So in a more of a learner-centered manner. So you are going to work tomorrow with Alessia on the various, let's say, learning outcomes of the competency that you have chosen. So the unit competency of bricklaying, for instance, and the two unit competencies that have been chosen by the tourism sector, in order to decompose the learning outcomes into learning situations. So creating a storyboard, creating a scenario, by using also the training materials that are made available already, that already exist. But you may want to review them, to change maybe something, because what we have seen, for instance, for tourism, there is a lot of just presentation and discussion, presentation and discussion, presentation and discussion that exist, but maybe you want to innovate on that in order then to have a clear idea of next week working on which parts you may want to digitalize. I don't know if there is any question on or comment on what we have shared with you and the work that we are going to do starting tomorrow.
Thank you, Professor. May please clarification about the technology. And I know standard they developed during the 1998. They call optional skill standard. But now they not use like this. They use the key term that the model of regional competency standard and competency standard. Like Cambodia before, they use the optional skill standard. Now to change the national competency standard. Some they call the skill standard, like they call some country, they call they say that the optional skill standard, some say that competency standard, like Cambodia, the national competency standard, like Philippines, South Korea, Australia. But in the New Zealand, New Zealand, they use the unit standard. What a different meaning, or they say?
Yeah, I mean, yes, there are different, let's say, labels that are also depending on the content that you have in those type of documents. So this is a little bit, we use the generic term occupational standard, and we know that there are different, let's say, wording of this according to the different countries. In some of the countries, you also, for instance, in French, you also have this label as occupational and competency standard. So because it entails both the photography of the occupation and then a deep dive in each of the competencies. So it depends a lot on the process, and there is no golden rule on that. What is important in our opinion is that this digitalization process that you are doing needs to be referenced to the standards that exist. So digitalizing, transforming digitally is a work on the how. So it's a work on the methodology, is a work on the technology that you use, but it's not a work that goes into the change of the outcomes and the competencies. So this is a parallel process. Of course, we encourage you to update and change your competency standard, and then this will mean that, of course, also the training will change. But the digitalization of the material and of the RPL assessment package takes into account what is the current existing national standard. You can call it occupational or competency standard. I mean, it's not. This depends on the country. But what we want to stress is the importance of this chain. Okay, these different steps: competency, learning outcomes, professional situations, and of course, based on the professional situations, the learning situations that are, let's say, composed into learning packages or scenarios.
Thank you.
Great.
Thank you.
Thanks for the question. Thanks for the comments, rather. Are there any other comments that you want to add? Are we fine with this process? So tomorrow we are going to start to look in each of the competency that we have chosen and create these learning sequences, these scenarios, these packages that are already based on what exists, no? Because you have this asset of the curricula and the training materials that are there, but maybe you want to innovate on them, you want to work on them, you want to better understand how you want to move on from the things that you already have in order then to digitalize this content. Karin, I don't know if you want to comment or come in.
Hi, everyone. No, not on my end, Stefano. I hope this is clear for everyone. I don't have anything more to add for this specifically. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. I would like to ask maybe a couple of people that are working in TVET centers. Do you currently work on in this way in developing your own curricula and lessons plan? Maybe we can take a couple of voices on that. So is this the thought process that you have when developing your sessions and developing your learning packages?
Maybe I inform you that my department is responsible for development of the standard training package in competency standard, competency-based curriculum, and competency package. These three documents must be approved, promulgated by competent body, the National Competent Training Board. And include the training package, we have the learning competency-based learning material. But my department really to develop because it is the living document that we include of the training developed by the trainer in the TVET institution. But we still have the format and content for them for develop. So we develop in the process. We based on the Levi Digital National Curriculum Framework. We alignment together with the National Qualification Framework, National Competency Standard Framework, work structure, and career classification. Because we interpret the Levi Digital or the NQS, interpret exactly the competency, unit competency, based on what exactly they perform in the real time with the career classification, like ISCO, the semi-skilled worker, the based on job title, skilled worker, or format like this. After that, we approve the national competence standard. We develop competence-based curriculum based on standard like your presentation. They're exactly the same what present. After that, we can transfer module of competency, unit of competency to the module of learning module or module instruction. Yes, I mean based on we have the competency that we have the 8 elements of competency. We have the permanent criteria. The element competency become a learning outcome. Permanent criteria become the standard, become assessment criteria of the module of training piece, and convert to the assessment package. But Cambodia, we still now we have the national document. We have the for the RPL assessment for expert worker, non-formal, informal to provide the recognition they have competency, recognize of their competency for RPL for unit competency or cluster, and a full collection for national competency assessment. We're not for formative assessment yet. With some material assessment in each independent module yet. So this is I do hope that this learning activity we have developed for the formative assessment for in the learning process, like you, Madam, and also scenario, the learner inflection for the during the course process, and at the end of module